Welcome back. This is a Marian Reforms and their military effects, Vikings in general. It's gonna be a fun reaction. I did a little research, which I'm gonna start doing a little bit more research prior to videos, just to kind of give me a level playing field on what is going to be talked about. For this particular video, we're talking about Marian Marius Gaius, same guy that we just looked at that became consul in the Jugurthian Wars. I will make a claim up front. I did see that there is kind of some disputes amongst scholars and specialists that these reforms took place because of Marius Gaius. So if you guys want to dispute that, let me know. But there's disputes out there. But let's watch. Let's not waste more time. Kings and generals.
This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Learn more about Skillshare and the exclusive offer they have for our viewers at the end of the video. In the late 2nd century BC, Rome had defeated and subjugated Greece and Macedonia, wiped Carthage from existence, and had delivered the Seleucid Empire a devastating blow. Its fort
I didn't know we had Issus in Cyprus. I'm not part of the Roman Empire. I don't know. So why we? I don't know. I didn't know that they had Cyprus and Issus.
Fortunes seemed to be ever increasing, but problems were growing slowly. The stress of ever-increasing warfare and wealth division in their society was threatening to tear the Republic apart. On top of this, the militia army of the earlier Republic was stagnating and becoming inadequate for facing new enemies due to a lack of manpower.
Right, there's very much a socioeconomic factor to the recruitment and to who joins the military. I think you had to own property. There's some other things that you had to follow through, and that's what I think a little bit of these reforms are going to try to tackle.
Soon a threat from the north would emerge that would necessitate the complete overhaul of the Roman military into what was essentially the first Roman imperial army. Welcome to our video on the Marian Reforms of the late Republic.
I said Marius Gaius. I'm so smart. It's Gaius Marius.
In 113 BC, a roaming army of Germanic warriors crossed Rome's border on the Danube, driven by unlivable climate conditions in their homeland. For the next few years, they rampaged around Roman territory and defeated a few Roman armies.
Wow.
In 105 BC, they crushed an army of 80,000 legionaries.
That's like Cannae.
At Arausio, after which the situation became critical.
80,000.
The Roman people were terrified and expected the Germanic hordes at the gates of Rome at any time. It seemed as though the Republic might fall until one man returned to take command, Gaius Marius.
Returned?
He had just finished the Jugurthine War against the Numidians and was elected consul in absentia during the year 105 BC. Yeah. Upon his return to Rome, he began to drastically alter the military in order to combat this new threat. His reforms would have a wide-ranging impact, both on the legions and the state of Rome. It is worth noting that not all of his changes were novel. Generals before Marius had paved the way for them, and had partaken in various different tactics before this time, such as the reduction of the baggage train. Marius, however, both created new methods for the Roman army and permanently instituted the effective methods of the other commanders who had come before him.
I think he's going to also talk about the cohort within all this, and I mean, most military reforms are just trying to get faster, better, and more efficient. Those three things, which, you know, the baggage train thing, you're trying to move faster because you have a baggage train, you got to have some sort of protection to it. It's going to usually be in the rear guard, usually, but depending on, you know, the situation, it might be in the middle. But also, you have to move fast in some situations, forced marches, so it's best to have smaller, more agile units eventually. And I mean, you'll see that all the way back into the Napoleonic days, where you'll start to see corps, so you'll be able to move in faster. But in this time, you have pretty much like legions, and legions are derived to centuries, etc. So this is interesting.
Until Marius's reforms, there was a property requirement to join the citizen militia legions.
Right.
This limited the number of legionaries, as they had to supply their own arms and armor and had to own property valued at 3,500 sesterces
so you had to be like middle class
or more. Perhaps the most important reform implemented by Marius was to ignore this property requirement. He allowed the Capitae Censi of Rome to join the legions, those counted by the head. The landless poor were now among the ranks of those who could join the legions, even though they had no property. On top of, and because of this, Marius arranged for the state to supply the legions with their arms and armor, offered poor recruits the chance to gain a professional soldier's pay, and the chance to gain loot and plunder on campaign. The masses, with little hope of gaining status in any other occupation, flocked to Marius's new legions.
Very smart.
In contrast to the earlier Roman policy in which the citizen army would disband after a campaign, recruits were now enlisted for a term of 16 years. This created a standing Roman army for the first time, and drastically increased its quality. On the other hand, the balanced cross-sectional army of the Roman people at war was destroyed, in favour of an army made up mainly of the landless poor, the proletarii. This would eventually have grave consequences for the Republic, as the poor soldiers became loyal to their generals rather than to the Roman state.
And we'll see that as foreshadowing.
While this seems like a landmark change, it is also possible that these reforms were just the final stage in an already occurring gradual decline in property requirements for the Roman army. The organization of the various Roman units was also completely changed in these reforms. The early maniple system was last recorded being used in the Battle of Muthul in the Jugurthine War of 109 BC. As the system had become obsolete and needed replacement, the Romans did away with it without sentimentality. By 104 BC,
and remember, he was part of that. Marius was part of that.
Marius had discarded 4 of the 5 legionary standards.
It standardizes it, yeah.
Which had been used for command and control purposes: the Minotaur, Horse, Boar, and Wolf. Only one remained, the Aquila, or Eagle. This is when the Roman Eagle standard became the emblem of the Roman legions. To replace the maniples as the primary tactical unit of the Roman military, the cohort was adopted. Compared to the 120-strong maniple, a standard Republican cohort was a larger 600-strong unit, comprised of 6 centuries. 480 of these men were legionaries, whereas the other 120 were non-combatants, either servants, slaves, or tactical support personnel such as engineers.
Yeah, people that basically help with all the things that come with camp, the march, everything.
The component unit, the Roman century, was a 100-strong unit commanded by a centurion. In this unit, 80 men served as legionaries and 20 men were non-combatants.
And then don't you also have like a second in command at like the other side diagonally of the centurion? The centurion would be at the top left. And then at the bottom right, you would have someone else. Forget his name, forget what it's called, but it's someone else that's like basically second in line, that's trying to just keep the people in line moving.
There was also no designated military commander of a cohort itself, and it is widely believed that either the most senior centurion took command, or the 6 centurions commanded together as a council.
Oh.
The smallest and most personal unit in this system was the contubernium. This was comprised of 10 men commanded by an officer called a decanus. 8 men were legionaries and only 2 were non-combatants.
That's right.
10 contubernia made up a century and 6 centuries made up a cohort. It was 10 of these new military divisions which made up a new Roman legion of around 6,000 men.
Oh, okay. So a Roman legion's 6,000 men, about 5,000 soldiers.
With 4,800 legionaries and 1,200 non-combatants.
Makes sense.
The abolition of the manipular system also abolished the 3 distinct lines of infantry of the mid-republic. The hastati, principes and triarii were removed, and instead 3 lines of infantry equipped similarly to the earlier principes were adopted. The form of triplex acies used in the Marian legion was different to the one implemented prior to it. Cohorts were a solid unit with only small gaps in between them, compared to the previous maniple system with larger gaps. This, along with the increased depth of the new cohorts, reduced the tendency of the soldiers to panic and flee, as they would feel they had more support and were safe. The legions were now on their way to becoming the force of popular imagination, a homogeneous force of heavy infantry armed with the gladius as their primary weapon and a dagger called the pugio as a sidearm. These new uniform warriors were all named legionarii. Their equipment mostly remained the same, but some tweaks were made. The iron shank of the pilum javelin was previously attached to the wooden shaft by 2 nails. However,
I love how detailed this is.
Marius replaced one of the nails with a less sturdy wooden peg. On impact, the peg would snap, rendering the pilum useless and bending the shank at a right angle, making the enemy even more encumbered by the impaling of their shields. As for protection, the legionarii wore a helmet, body armor and greaves. Their main protection, however, was still the large scutum shield, which covered the soldier from shoulder to shin. A legionary would also bash and batter opponents with this shield,
yeah, that thing would knock you out,
despite its weight. In this way, it could be just as offensive as his blade. The 1,200 non-combat attendants may seem like a lot of support personnel at first glance, but it is important to remember the key role of logistics in warfare. Without food, animals, fuel and maintenance, an army could not function.
Right, because they gotta build redoubts, you gotta eat, you gotta get food, you gotta man the fires, you gotta help the baggage train, you gotta feed the animals, you gotta... So much. You gotta... Oh man, there's so much.
The reforms did not ignore logistics, and the creation of Marius's mules was a perfect example of this.
Mules.
Under Marius, legionaries began to carry all of their equipment themselves, rather than relying on a cumbersome baggage train. This had many positive impacts for the operations of the army. The soldiers themselves became conditioned by their heavy load, with the physical training increasing their endurance during combat. In addition, the soldiers carrying their own entrenching equipment allowed for the rapid construction of fortifications, camps and earthworks. Finally, the lack of a massive baggage train also allowed the legions to move extremely quickly compared to their prior speed. The only drawbacks were the complaints from the legionaries about their new heavy workload.
Yeah, it's probably the first couple generations for sure.
Becoming referred to as Marius's mules, named so for their heavy packs. As the Republic progressed, the unpopular nature of horsemanship in Roman society resulted in a severe deficit of cavalry. While the Romans were still fighting smaller foes on their peninsula, the smaller cavalry wing they possessed was adequate. However, as they began to come into contact with larger external foes with fearsome cavalry contingents such as the Germans or Gauls.
I mean, they just faced the Numidians prior, right? And up to this point, I was thinking like the Numidian cavalry are like the most formidable cavalry in the world. I mean, there's probably some in the east that are even better, you know. There's definitely some in the east that are better just because of the steppe and the flat plains of Persia, etc. But I don't know. It's very hard to have a good cavalry in Europe.
It resulted in serious setbacks, despite their lethal heavy infantry. After the Battle of Zama, Roman armies were almost always accompanied by a significant force of non-Italian cavalry. This became even more pronounced in the time of Marius, as he disbanded most of the Roman and Italian cavalry, replacing it entirely with native allied cavalry, who were often better trained and had specialized equipment from their homeland.
I think it was called the citizen cavalry that he disbanded.
In his later conquest of Gaul, Julius Caesar relied heavily on the famous Numidian cavalry, and later his Gallic and Germanic heavy cavalry for his victories in that war.
Oh yeah.
Indeed, the final cavalry charge that gained victory at the Battle of Alesia in 52 BC was made by Caesar's German cavalry. Allied light infantry auxilia were also used in place of the earlier velites, which Marius disbanded. Various native peoples from around and outside the empire were used, including but not limited to German light infantry, Balearic slingers, Cretan archers, and light Spanish melee troops. Using his newly honed legions and tactics, Marius was successful, and the Cimbri were defeated once and for all at the battles of Aquae Sextiae and Vercellae in 102 and 101 BC. The reforms had their desired effect on the army, making it a standing professional force which did not disband after campaigning, allowing it to retain its experience.
Like you said, 16 years, which is like maybe like a term, right? And there's probably a bunch of people that get to the end of the 16 years and sign up again for another 16 years. You see the same thing in like today's time when people have contracts and they re-sign, etc. But you probably see a lot of people like, all right, thank God my 16 years is over, I'm out. And it's very interesting. It creates that professional soldier versus just like contracts.
In the coming centuries, this would set the stage for the development of the most efficient and deadly army of the ancient world. Despite the benefits, such massive changes would not go without consequence for the Republic. Because the general of a Roman army was responsible for the payment of their soldiers in both land and coin, the armies would often be more loyal to their general than to the Roman state. This was exacerbated as the majority of legionaries were now the poorer proletarii who desired payment and advancement. As a result,
and they see whomever as like their, their boss that it creates wealth for them, they're gonna definitely side to them.
Power began to shift from the senatorial class to the commanders in the field. From Marius to Sulla, Pompey, and finally to Caesar, this would cause a series of power struggles between various strongmen of Rome, which led to a series of civil wars. Eventually, the strain of these immense social changes would result in the rise of the imperial system under Augustus. The sponsor
beautiful video.
Of this video,
I think this is a great place right here. Like just seeing the power difference between the Senate or the state versus like the individuals. This is of course where the civil wars create. Like they said with Pompey. I need to study more on Sulla. I don't know too much about Sulla. I know a lot of people don't like Sulla, especially Cicero. But others don't as well. But more or less, this was interesting to kind of understand kind of the reforms that were created. Now, like I said, there's some people out there that disagree that this man, Gaius Marius, actually created these reforms in terms of like a singular event or like a combination of events. Instead, the text reads that this was more or less like a culmination of like several decades worth of reforms over time versus just and then it was equated to maybe the start of it, maybe with Marius. I'd love to see if there's any combatants to that, but yeah, very interesting stuff. Rome really becomes a professional military at this point after the Jugurthian War. Yeah, thanks for watching. Until next time, though, peace out and bye-bye.